We have a very full day, and a day with, I think, some new information that hasn't been discussed fully here in Washington. The subject of transatlantic cooperation in cybersecurity, what the European Union is doing, what the Commission is doing is very important, and today we'll focus on this subject. I'd now like to welcome our co-host. This is you.
Thank you, Jim, so much. I would also like to welcome everybody on behalf of the European Security Roundtable. Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Heather, for having picked up this opportunity to organize this day with us. I'm very glad that so many people responded to our common call to have a transatlantic cybersecurity community meeting. And I would like to thank you, therefore, that it's possible to do it here with you. I would like to thank also SRA, a true transatlantic private sector stakeholder who also made this opportunity possible. Thank you very much for the great support. And I would like to thank the Commission in particular that you took the time to come here, because as we all know, going over the Atlantic, it does take a lot of time. We're all very busy. It's very much appreciated that you came here, also made it possible to have this opportunity today. I would like to thank in particular also the Estonian and the German embassy, who were also extremely helpful and supportive in getting this event together. And I would also like to mention the European Parliament's liaising office, who was also tremendously helpful. And last but not least, I wanted to thank Kristen for linking up, shall I say, the two sides of the Atlantic, which is, as we all know, not always an easy endeavor. You, Commissioner Malmström, you are intensely active here also in transatlantic activities. European interior ministries, the European Commission interact very closely with US administration. It is good, it's necessary. Sometimes it's also a bit controversial, at least when we look at the media picture. This is what we're here for, to talk about things, clarify. I'm sure we'll hear a lot about the newly to be established European Cybercrime Center, but not only, and I look very much forward to what you have to tell us. Please, Commissioner, the floor is yours. Thank you.
No, we're going to have Heather introduce them.
Oh, excuse me. I'm sorry. Right. Take that back. So, Heather, the floor is yours.
I always like the quote from Dr. Henry Kissinger, who received an introduction, and the gentleman said, "For a man who needs no introduction." And Dr. Kissinger said, "It is true, I do not need an introduction, but I like a really good introduction." So I want to give a really good introduction to Commissioner Malmström and, of course, Deputy Secretary Lute. We love transatlantic conversations, and we could not be delighted to have two very important and powerful voices with us this morning. We're absolutely delighted to welcome EU Commissioner for Home Affairs, Cecilia Malmstr&ouml, appointed in 2010. She has the incredible responsibility of looking after EU border control, asylum and migration policy, and police cooperation. Prior to this important position, Commissioner Malmström was the Swedish Minister for EU Affairs from 2006 to 2010, with a strong focus on preparations for implementation of the Lisbon Treaty and the Swedish EU rotating presidency at that time. But she knows Brussels extremely well, having served as a member of the European Parliament from 1999 to 2006, where she served on the Foreign Affairs Committee and the Constitutional Affairs Committee. But there's one title that I actually hold very dear that we did not know until yesterday. Commissioner Malmström was a CSIS intern. 10 weeks, a women's leadership program. If I cannot point to a better advertisement for our young interns and our women leaders, this is terrific. So we're so delighted. After the Commissioner provides her remarks, we're going to welcome Deputy Secretary Jane Hall-Lute to offer her remarks. Secretary Lute has the responsibility for overseeing the third largest federal agency with a staff of over 240,000 people. That's an awesome management responsibility, and she has been so well prepared for this responsibility with such a distinguished career both in the public sector as well as international civil service, serving as the Assistant Secretary General for UN Peacekeeping Operations, the Assistant Secretary General for Peacebuilding Operations. She's, we claim her as a think tanker as well. She, and a non-NGO, she served as the Chief Operating Officer for the United Nations Foundation and has served on the National Security Council under 2 presidents. So we could not be more grateful, Deputy Secretary Lute, for making time to visit with us today. And then after we have the remarks, our very own Jim Lewis is going to moderate the Q&A session where we bring you into the conversation. And I think I already warned Deputy Secretary Lute that Jim may have some stories of his own during this Q&A session. So I forewarn you, the conversation will be interesting. So again, welcome. Thank you, Christoph Robb and the European Security Roundtable and my colleague, Jim Lewis, who's been just a stalwart for this project. And take it away, Commissioner Malmstr&ouml. Come on up. Thank you. Oh, you want to do it from the, you can do it from the podium or from where, whatever you prefer.
Thank you very much for that introduction. It was a good introduction. Yeah. And I'm glad we could agree on this little promotion for CSIS as well. Ladies and gentlemen, a very good morning. I'm extremely honored to be here today. Of course, I didn't hesitate a moment when I was asked to come to Washington, and when I saw that CSIS was one of the organizers, of course, that brought very fond memories when I was here 15 years ago. In this room, I think we had quite a lot of conferences as well. So I want to thank CSIS, I want to thank the European Security Roundtable and the SRFA for organizing this. It's an excellent opportunity to come together to talk about a very, very important subject dear to both Europe and US, and hopefully a few good ideas and new ways for cooperation can be born out of this. We have to win the battle of everybody who's trying to interrupt our digital lives, and this is a true challenge that we can only overcome together. I would like to start by telling you about a joint operation conducted by FBI and Europol in the field of child sexual exploitation. The name of this operation was Atlantic, and the case was completed only 2 months ago. Thanks to the very close cooperation between FBI, Europol, and several individual member states, an international network of child sex offenders was dismantled. Several arrests were made on both sides of the Atlantic, and 8 children, small children, could be saved and brought back from their capturers, preventing further horrific offenses of these children. So I'm, of course, extremely grateful for the professionalism and the dedication that I have seen from law enforcement to fight this horrible crime, and many others as well. Yesterday, I had the opportunity to be briefed more in detail about cybercrime and how you work at FBI. And we saw a lot of ground for cooperation, a lot of things we can learn from our US friends, maybe some things we can contribute to as well. And I was impressed about the commitment, about the engagement, and of the professionalism that I saw here today. And this has reinforced my view that we really need to deepen even further our cooperation over the Atlantic. The US and the European Union are targets, primary targets for different kinds of cyber threats. Our governments, our businesses, our citizens are under siege from increasingly sophisticated attacks. And they can come from many sources, from other states to organized crimes and hackers. And to overcome this growing global threat, our cooperation is not a choice, it's an obligation, it's a necessity. The establishment of the EU-US Cyber Security Working Group in November 2 years ago was a first step to identify strategic goals and concrete actions. And I'm leading our work on the cybercrime together with Secretary of Homeland Security, Janet Napolitano, and the Attorney General, Eric Holder, plays an important role, as does Deputy Secretary Jane Lute. And we discussed this only a few days ago in Luxembourg, how we could further enhance our cooperation. So we have very good partners on the American side on this. So this working group so far has been a success. We had the first Cyber Atlantic exercise, 2011, that kicked off a groundbreaking program of joint cyber attack exercises, and that will culminate in a further full-fledged exercise in 2014. The working group has also been instrumental in raising international awareness of the problem associated with the misuse of domain names. Unfortunately, as you know, it is still possible to register a domain name under the name of Mickey Mouse Disneyland. Almost 50% of the data given by applicants to the top 5 level domains, .com, .org, .net, .info, and .biz, contains evidence of fake, false, or incomplete identity information. And that makes it, of course, very difficult, if not impossible, for law enforcement to trace offenders abusing those internet resources. After considerable pressure from the EU and from US, we have finally seen a commitment from the Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers, ECAN, and the private sector to implement specific law enforcement recommendations in their policies. And we must jointly continue to press ECAN to deliver at its upcoming meeting in Prague this June. So the actions of your government in the coming weeks will of course be decisive if we are to succeed this. This year we're also planning a summit on child protection. We are particularly concerned about child sexual exploitation online. During the past decade, we have seen an unprecedented expansion of the market for child abuse images. This is of course a horrible crime, and although we have successfully disrupted numerous child abuse networks, we must do much more to protect our children from harm. Alongside its cooperation with the US, the EU will also have to do its own homework to make cyberspace safer. As more and more of our everyday lives and business transactions happen online, so does criminal activity. Online organized crime ranges from selling a stolen credit card for as little as €1 to advanced identity theft. And we must make sure that people feel comfortable of having their ordinary life, their digital life, with trust, because of course it's a matter of trust, but it's also a matter of the economy. If people do not dare to use all the benefits online, that will have disastrous consequences for the economy as well. We must ensure that our legislation keeps up to this, of course. The new technological development is running so fast, so legislation is running after all the time. In the EU, we hope to agree very soon on a proposal on a legislation to update our current legislation, including measures to address the rising threat from botnets. So legislation is important, but it's not enough. We must also equip law enforcement agencies with the operational tools and the intelligence to respond to a threat. A month ago, I presented our plans to set up a European cybercrime center. The center will be established within the Europol in the Netherlands. And this center will be a European focal point in the fight against cybercrime. It will help to prevent illegal online activities of organized crime groups, such as online fraud involving credit cards and bank credentials. It will also work very closely with social networks to protect users from online identity theft. It will focus on cybercrime that causes the most harm, including online sexual exploitation of children and attacks on a critical infrastructure. This center, we hope, will be an invaluable resource for member states, providing operational support, promoting best practice, and gathering intelligence from a wide range of sources. The intelligence will be used to warn member states of major cybercrime threats and alert them to weaknesses on their online defenses. Besides the member states, the center will also work closely with the private sector. But the center will not only be an inward-facing, it will also become the natural partner for international initiatives and law enforcement agencies in the field of cybercrime, such as FBI, Secret Service, and Interpol. And you will hear more about this in a second panel. We have a very distinguished guest here from Europol. As you have heard, we have a strong package of measures to prevent cybercrime. But to be effective, we have to align these measures with initiatives that we have taken in the wider field of cybersecurity. Some member states in the European Union, as you know, we are 27, have already quite advanced cybersecurity strategies in place. And I'm well aware of the US strategy as well and the efforts that you have put into that document. Other member states are not as advanced, and it will of course be very important for us to help to raise the levels so that everybody is at the same level. And it is also time for the European Union to set out a joint vision on how we can enhance security in cyberspace. So we need everyone, governments, business, individuals, to work together and to share that responsibility. Our strategy, and I say ours because it will be a joint product of several colleagues within the Commission. For instance, Lady Ashton, as you know, is responsible for foreign affairs, the High Representative, Vice President Neelie Kroes, who is a commissioner responsible for the digital agenda. We are stepping up now our efforts to ensure cybersecurity. We're working together to establish a joint cyber strategy, and it is still work in progress, so I'm looking forward to good discussions here today, but let me just give you a few elements of what we intend to cover. First, we intend to communicate the ever-important message that freedom and security in cyberspace is not mutually exclusive. We can do both, and we must do both. The virtue of an open cyberspace has to be maintained while, of course, providing the right levels of security. Secondly, we need to enhance our cybersecurity resilience and response capacities. We must become better at sharing critical information in a secure and confidential manner within and between public and private sectors in the EU member states. This is, I know, also a major issue here in the US. And there are areas where we can work together to enhance the sharing of information through transatlantic partnerships. We must furthermore enhance our resilience against cyber attacks on a critical infrastructure, including a cyber component to existing crisis management procedures at all EU levels. Third, we know that the private sector owns and runs most of the infrastructure, so they must have the incentives to improve their own security and to coordinate much more effectively, both within the national authorities and with each other. For example, the private sector can and should be much better at managing risks and exchanging information when security breaches do occur. We know from experience that a top-down approach in this field, with governments trying to mandate better security, cybersecurity, is bound to fail. We have to seek out new intelligent ways of working with the private sector to create trust, to improve the coordination, and increase the joint handling of incidents. We also need better software, more resilient technology in the future. This is, of course, primarily a responsibility for the private sector, but the EU will continue to invest in security technology innovation. Finally, since the cyber threat is a global threat, we need global cooperation. The cyber strategy will therefore identify how the EU can reach out to its strategic partners and make our response more effective. The US-EU work in this regard is a good example. Instead of focusing on institutional setup and developing new conventions, we have built upon the Budapest Convention and identified immediate, concrete actions to make citizens and business safer. We also have the beginning of a strong operational partnership between the EU and the US. I'm convinced that in the coming months and years, we will be able to report back to our citizens on many successful joint operations between FBI and Europol. We have outlined some good work, and I think it's impressive. We should be proud of ourselves. We have the establishment of the Cybercrime Center and the different work we are doing in the European Union, the work that you are doing in the US. But of course, we also have to be honest. For the time being, the bad guys have the upper hand. So the only way to change the game in our favor is for us to act quickly and to act together. Being among friends here today and colleagues in this room, I'm hopeful that we can win the debate and I'm hopeful we can win the battle. And I'm looking forward to good suggestions, good discussions, and the beginning of an even deepened partnership between us. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Well, good morning. It's imposing. When during the introduction and the very kind introduction, when you mentioned that Homeland Security was the third largest department with 210,000 employees, we have quite a number of additional contractors. Cecilia leaned over to me and said, "My God, that's Luxembourg." I was just in Luxembourg. It's not Luxembourg. But it is large, and it is at its heart an operational department. I have to say at the outset, to thanks to CSIS and to its partners for hosting this event and for giving us the opportunity to speak with our European colleagues, which is something we're doing with increasing frequency these days, weeks, and months. Indeed, my colleagues and I have just concluded a negotiation with Cecilia and her colleagues on a major data exchange regarding passenger name records, so-called PNR. And it was an instructive experience for us in many ways, not least in giving us a deep and abiding insight into New Europe. I was at one meeting and mentioned that I was curious about the views of New Europe, and I spoke to a Polish colleague, and she was puzzled. And one of her colleagues said, "Oh, she means the former Soviet, the former East Bloc." And this young woman looked at me and she said, "That's not New Europe. New Europe is all of us, post-Lisbon. That's the New Europe. And that's the New Europe that we need to learn and understand." And it has been an extraordinary experience for us to get to know the Commission, the Council, the Parliament in great detail, and capitals as they are adjusting to life post-Lisbon with highly invigorated and responsibilized institutions. Not least in the area of cyber and of cybersecurity, and that's what we're here all to talk about, certainly, not only our Transatlantic partnership, but the problems in cybersecurity more generally. Homeland Security has a key role in cybersecurity for the United States. And I find that when I talk about the role of Homeland Security, it's almost as important to talk first about not just its cyber role, but of Homeland Security more generally. Because while many people have heard of us and we have great brand name recognition, we have something less than great brand name understanding of what it means we do when we talk about Homeland Security. What are we trying to do in this department, in this endeavor that we call Homeland Security? I'll talk a little bit about that, focus on cyber, touch on our strategy that we're promoting in Homeland Security, and then embrace, obviously, the theme of international partnership and what we're trying to do with the Europeans and more broadly around the world in the area of cybersecurity. Homeland Security has at its heart the core mission of helping to create a safe, secure, resilient place where the American way of life can thrive. That's our sentence. That's our motivation. That's our touchstone. A safe, secure, resilient place where the American way of life can thrive. We think in order to do that, we need to do 5 things well. Prevent terrorism, certainly. This is job 1 for us. Secure our borders. This is important. Not only do we need to keep out people or goods that might be dangerous, but we need to expedite legitimate trade and travel. We need to do both things if we're going to secure our border. We need to manage immigration, enforce our immigration laws. We need to safeguard cyberspace, ensure that it is also safe, secure, and resilient as a place where our way of life can thrive. And we need to build national resilience. What's this about? It's about creating empowered individuals, capable communities, and a responsive federal system so that we can address all hazards when and as they come. Now, I've spent most of my career, indeed almost all of it, in national security, and it's common to think of Homeland Security as just a lesser included piece of national security. It is, of course, but what I've also discovered over the past 3.5 years is that it's really qualitatively different. Homeland Security is different than national security in important ways and in ways that matter for cybersecurity very meaningfully. What do I mean? National security is something we understand that's strategic, it's centralized, and it's top-driven. Homeland Security is operational, transactional, decentralized, and bottom-driven, driven by the states, the communities, the cities, the municipalities of this country. So much of what we do in Homeland Security is animated in the first instance by the needs of the cities, municipalities, and states, and of all the American people. If national security is about all of us, Homeland Security is in a very real way about each of us. And we take this approach because it fundamentally informs us that no single department can do all that needs doing when it comes to any aspect of Homeland Security. Indeed, in the case of cybersecurity globally, as Cecilia has mentioned, no single government can do all that needs doing as well. It is an important difference to understand. It animates in a very real way how we approach all of our tasks. We called out cybersecurity and the importance of a safe and secure cyberspace as a core mission of Homeland Security because we believe that cyberspace is the endoskeleton of modern life. It's the endoskeleton of modern society, certainly of this society. It's impossible to imagine a safe, secure, resilient place if cyberspace for the United States, for Americans, and indeed for our global partners around the world is somehow in peril. What do I mean by that? What does it take to ensure cybersecurity? Two things. Ensuring the fidelity, the security, and reliability of our information, and the security, fidelity, and reliability of our identities in exchanging information. The rest, as we say in my religious tradition, is commentary. That is the core problem. How do we secure those two things? We have a strategy for cybersecurity. We call it our cyber blueprint. We think we need to do fundamentally two basic things: protect the critical cyber infrastructure of this country and build a healthy, resilient, and dynamic cyber ecosystem. How do we protect the critical infrastructure? First of all, again, 90% of it in this country, of the critical infrastructure, not just cyber infrastructure, but of the critical infrastructure in this country, rests in private sector hands. And we operate in Homeland Security with the principle of nothing about you without you. So we work very closely with the private sector across the board in addressing the needs of cybersecurity for these infrastructures, these critical infrastructures as well. We need to establish and maintain situational awareness. What is happening? What is the relative health of our cyber infrastructure? How do we reduce the risks and exposures to that infrastructure? How do we respond in a dynamic and real and effective way when intrusions occur and other mischief and problems? And how do we build in resilience to these infrastructures so that they can withstand the challenges that they face? When it comes to building a cyber ecosystem, we focus here, again, on empowering individuals. We need smart individuals and smart machines. We need to build out organizations that are themselves intelligent and responsive. We need to promote trustworthy protocols, services, products, configurations, and architectures. And we need to build very fundamentally collaborative communities and understand how these communities can operate together. Now, I think it's fair to say that when it comes to cybersecurity, there is a significant misperception out there. There's a significant problem, and of course, there is a significant opportunity whenever there's a significant problem. What's the misperception? The misperception, I think, is that when it comes to cybersecurity, the role of government is clear. That's a misperception. It's not yet clear to many people. What's the problem? The problem is the view of the role of government is polarized. And there's a great debate going on among those who are paying attention anyway. They would call it a great debate. We always do when you're inside the debate. And the views might be characterized, perhaps unfairly, but perhaps simplistically, as follows. There are those who believe that government has no meaningful role to play in cybersecurity, that the internet itself, while originally founded with government engagement, certainly has grown and expanded and generated the new wealth that it has, representing the dynamic force that it is in all of our lives, in a way that was largely a result of market mechanisms, market-driven forces, the private sector. Government has no role and should have no role in intruding in this space in the name of cybersecurity. On the other hand are those who think that, frankly, it's a war zone out there, and that it is so dangerous and so urgent that governments must come in forcefully to establish regimes of cybersecurity that everyone must adhere to. We believe very fundamentally, though, that the truth lies somewhere in the middle, not surprisingly. In our view, the status quo with respect to cybersecurity is not acceptable, that governments do have a role to play, must play a role here, and we will play a role. Cecilia mentioned in the case of the European Union the dialogue that's going on with respect not only to the member states but to the EU institutions as well as how to think through the appropriate role to play when it comes to balancing freedom and openness and access to the internet with security. How do we build that openness and that access in a way that also ensures resilience? How do we understand the role of the private sector when they are so critical to the very functioning of the internet? And how do we ensure and instill and even instantiate global cooperation for building cybersecurity? The United States international policy and strategy on cyber security identifies a number of priorities for this country in approaching international standards, innovation, and the role of the internet. Certainly we want to protect our economy and our economic livelihood. We think standards and innovative open markets ensure this. We want to protect our networks. We want to strengthen the hand of law enforcement and extend collaboration, law enforcement collaboration and the rule of law to enhance confidence in cyberspace. We also know that when it comes to internet governance, that an open, multi-stakeholder system and model is the right approach in our view, and we believe in this strongly. We believe in the power of the internet for international development, and all of this must be achieved while maintaining internet freedom of access, resilience, interoperability, and fidelity. What does this mean at the end of the day for cybersecurity and for the Department of Homeland Security? We'll continue to pursue our responsibilities of working with the private sector in this country to safeguard and secure the critical infrastructure, but also to build out this ecosystem that we believe is essential. It too is a multi-stakeholder model where responsibility is distributed, where networks are supported by intelligent protocols and architectures, and while the federal system engagement is responsive and appropriately positioned to ensure the critical cybersecurity of this country. None of this can be done alone. We are active in our partnerships not only across the federal government in the case of DHS, but also across the globe. And there is perhaps no more important partner than our partner in the European Union. I mentioned that my colleagues and I have just concluded a negotiation on this major data exchange. At the heart of that negotiation, which took 18 months, and Cecilia reminds me, it actually took 9 years. I need a chair. I am pleased to say that we successfully concluded this agreement, and we hope we don't need another one for at least the next 7 years. At the heart of this negotiation was the issue of privacy. How do we ensure cybersecurity? How do we ensure the privacy and protection, the civil rights and civil liberties, and the exchange of information? This is a part and at the heart of the cybersecurity debate as well. We have different views of privacy here in the United States as against those in Europe. I'm no European legal expert, and I'm perhaps no American legal expert either, as I think about it. But there is a way to characterize the differences of views, and they're important. From an American point of view, privacy is about limiting the ability of government to intrude into our lives. From the European point of view, if I can be permitted a characterization, it's about controlling one's information once you put it out there. These are two very different views, and they are equally legitimate. And the heart of our agreement was in recognizing the legitimacy of each other's point of views on terms that each other finds important. We will succeed in the agenda of cybersecurity. I mentioned there was a misperception about the role of governments. I mentioned that there was a problem because in the debate in some quarters is dominated by extreme views, but there is an opportunity. And the opportunity exists in dialogue and in partnership, such as we have with the European Union, to solve these problems in an inclusive way that helps create a safe, secure, and resilient cyberspace for us all. Thanks very much.